I'm Kristin Scott, and I'm in the management department, and my focus research area has been on dysfunctional workplace behavior, abusive leadership, but more recently, positive organizational scholarship, so getting a little bit more into how we build positive cultures and supportive workplaces. So I was inspired to research initially why people do dysfunctional things in the workplace, or things that are detrimental to themselves or others. So I studied things like leaders who are unkind, emotionally volatile. I studied how employees react to being either excluded in the workplace or undermined, gossiped about. And a lot of that was driven by just wanting to understand why people would behave that way when it was supposed to be a professional environment. And so what I uncovered a lot during that time and through other research of my colleagues is that most of those behaviors are driven by some kind of fear. And usually that's a fear of failure, fear of losing control, lack of trust. And then about a decade into my research, it occurred to me, okay, so what we find is that these behaviors occur. It's not good for leaders, it's not good for employees. Oftentimes people will take this home and there's nothing positive associated with it, so how can we make it better? How can we minimize that? And that's when I started really turning to research in it's called positive organizational scholarship. And so the last probably 5 or 6 years, I've really tried to hone in more on exploring positive mindsets in the workplace, like being grateful, being compassionate. There's a big push to study mindfulness, so we've had some research that looks into that as well. But really, just what do we need to do, both personally and then also as leaders, to build a positive work culture? A recent study that we have published just in the last, I guess, year and a half or so ago was looking at what happens when we become more mindful at work. There's, again, a lot of research that has looked at mindfulness and has touted the benefits of it, but we wanted to understand more detail about what happens when you get to that place where you stop focusing on the negative as much. And so that study really delved into the mindset process. And so what we explored through several different studies was that when we can stop, kind of take a breath, and disconnect a little bit from those feelings that are frustrating us or maybe stressing us out in the workplace, we then are more likely to start noticing. We become what we call more perceptive about our environment. We're able to notice the good things more easily. And in doing so, we can have more gratitude and a positive attitude. And so we were able to show that pretty consistently across different studies, that when people engage in those behaviors, it ultimately leads to positive behavior too. These folks were more willing to help their colleagues and do good things in the workplace. I think a big takeaway from that is we showed that once you're in a positive mindset, it has a lot of benefit to that employee and to the workplace as a whole. But I think it's hard for people to bust out of being stressed out in the workplace, or sometimes get themselves in a mental state where they can be more positive. So I think the lessons learned there, particularly from a leadership standpoint, is if you can create a culture where you bring attention to the benefits of stopping to take stock of what is going well. And that, if that means taking breaks in meetings to everybody collectively recognize what's going well and what they've learned from some of their challenges, or even acknowledge each other for the good things that they've done, it can really set in motion then a positive set of psychological events within those individuals, and it also perpetuates a positive culture. And it makes it easier then for organizations to, I think, experience the benefits both to their employees and to their performance outcomes by doing that. This study isn't yet published, it's under review, but during the latter half of the pandemic, some colleagues and I surveyed musicians, and this was still during the lockdown period of COVID, when these individuals weren't able to work in the traditional sense. They were not able to go to venues, those still weren't open, and so we were looking at what enabled people to be resilient in such a dire time, especially this population where they were pretty much cut off from their typical livelihood. And one of the things that has really interested me is when we study mindfulness, I feel like we're tapping into a place where people have gotten through a lot of those hard emotions and those negative mindsets. And so when we study it, we capture folks who are already in a good place mentally. And so what I really wanted to understand was when people are not in a good place and they're really struggling, what helps them keep going? And mindfulness is helpful, but it wasn't the overriding factor. What appeared to be the more important factor was having hope. And hope actually allowed people to stay motivated and find other ways to do their work. So some of the musicians did, like online concerts. They could still collaborate. They could still work virtually, which was different. But these were the individuals that, when they didn't lose hope, when they stayed resilient and wanted to keep going, they found other ways to pursue their career outside of the norm. And so to me, that was really an interesting finding, that mindfulness is good. It does help you get to the point of being hopeful, but that you can also be hopeful while being stressed out. And that's also a really, really powerful mindset to be in. Well, the Powers Fellowship Award in and of itself was a wonderful way to feel recognized by taking the many decades I've been at Clemson and also doing this research. I think it was wonderful that they developed these fellowships to recognize those of us in the college who were working on multiple research projects, and at this stage, usually while juggling a lot of other responsibilities through service to the university and teaching multiple classes. So I feel like that was a way for the college to say, you know what, we as an institution, we do value research and we want to acknowledge you for doing that. And so that's been something I've been really grateful for. So one of the really wonderful things about working at a research institution is you typically will collaborate, not just with folks at Clemson, but we will research with other scholars around the world oftentimes. And I'd say that's the first impact, is just by us trying to utilize strengths of researchers across the globe, we're automatically having those connections to other institutions. We kind of follow through with that at conferences that we attend and build those relationships. That also allows us to utilize, maybe it's a research lab that specializes in a certain area. And in turn, I think that the impact of that is we can then communicate our findings and our lessons learned, if you will, back out to industry, back out to leaders through different ways. Sometimes it's through those conferences, other times it's through training programs, other times they seek us out and want to just learn more about the research that we've done. And so I've seen a lot of that obviously in the business school, and then if you get into some of the more hard sciences, Clemson has a lot of great relationships with partnerships also around the world where we're impacting agriculture, engineering, biology, the healthcare field. So a lot of really powerful ways that research can impact not just the Clemson area and the upstate of South Carolina, but literally around the world. As I've mentioned, I started out studying why people behave badly in the workplace, and have more recently moved into how can we help people not feel so negative that they engage in those types of behaviors. So something that I'm actually really curious about, we know that when people are in positive mindsets, that they are more likely to engage in positive behaviors. They're likely to be more supportive, they're less stressed. So lots of good things. But what's peculiar to me is that people oftentimes will resist those positive mindsets. It's almost like they stay stuck dwelling on the negative. And so there's different potential reasons for why that is. And again, it's sometimes a self-protection mode where we're trying to make sure we're prepared for worst case scenario, or we're really looking out for our best interest. But then there are other times where individuals just seem stuck. So the next phase of my research, I'd really like to look into more specifically the reasons, different reasons why people stay stuck or resist wanting to change into a positive mindset, so that we can hopefully design some programs or educational materials to help people with that.